Hey everyone, welcome to the 100k subs party and Q&A live stream. It's so much fun to do this for the first time with you guys. I did a couple of test runs with live stream software to kind of figure things out and hopefully not have too many connection issues. But that all seems to be working, so great you're here. I think, yeah, for me, getting to the 100k subs thing was like really incredible. I mean, it's such a crazy number actually when you think about it. Yes, actually Sil is also writing that. That actually I also reached like 5 million views on the channel in total, which is an even more ridiculous number. So it's really crazy. But thank you so much for watching the videos, for subscribing, for liking them, for giving me comments on the videos. Actually, your comments are incredibly helpful. I read all of them. I can't reply to all of your comments, of course, because there are a lot of them, but they really help me keep me sharp, basically. And that's actually one of the main reasons why I actually enjoy so much posting these YouTube videos, because it's actually really a learning process for myself as well. So that's really awesome. So what I'd like to do today is go through some of your questions. I got like lots of them, so I'm not sure I will be able to answer all of your questions, but I'll go through most of the important ones. If you have other questions, also feel free to post them in the chat, and I'll try to answer a couple of questions in the chat as well, if it's not all going too quickly. Thanks also Aaron, Close, and Mace Winnon for becoming a member. Welcome. Thank you for your support. That's really great. And let me start by the questions right away, because I think that gives a good basis for our chat today. So I want to start with a few, let's say, more general questions before I really dive into the in-depth Python questions. Maybe to start, there was a question by John Brooks. I like that you chose a language that is widely used, Python, obviously, and then go on to use it to demonstrate patterns and best practices. My question is, do you plan to continue in this approach? So it's more a question about the future of the channel, basically. And there was also a question by Gonzalo. What do you plan to do for future videos? And Sil also asked, can you share a bit about new upcoming video topics that you're planning? So, okay. Well, maybe to look back a little bit before I talk about the future. I started the channel at the end of 2020. And at that time, I actually didn't even start it as a Python channel at all. I was running a startup company. I'm still running that same company, by the way. And I noticed I made like lots of mistakes in the past years on lots of technical mistakes, like choosing the wrong kind of platform to do things, choosing the wrong programming language, choosing the wrong libraries, making the wrong decisions. Of course, there also some things went right, but I also did make a lot of mistakes. So I thought, why not start a channel where I start talking a bit about if you run a software company, what can go wrong, and what can we learn from the things that I did wrong, and that maybe can help other people. So that's how I got started. But I actually also really like to dive sometimes a bit into the technical topics. And I noticed that every time I did a more technical video where I showed some code and I did some examples, that it actually worked much better. And so, yeah, so it kind of grew from that very generic kind of startup entrepreneurship technical channel to really a more coding-oriented channel. And the funny thing was that at the time I was working at the university. I was teaching a bachelor course on software design. And, well, they asked me, hey, can you maybe do it in Python? Because a lot of the rest of our program is also in Python. So I started creating these examples, these software design examples in in Python. And I already had lots of years of experience with Python. I never really used it for huge projects. But I built smaller tools with it over the years and used it on and off in all kinds of different versions and all kinds of little projects. So I started creating those examples, and then I noticed hey, there's actually really little information you can find online about how do you do, software design actually in Python. And in Python, it's actually really difficult because it's such a flexible and open language with all the dunder methods, and you can basically, screw up everything if you want to. And that means there's 10 different ways of doing things. Also, a lot of people who get into Python don't really have a computer science background, so they start to look at some tutorials online and apply some tricks. And then when things start to get complicated, it becomes really hard to control your code and build something that's actually easy to maintain. So when I saw that, I thought, hey, maybe I should also do some videos about that on my channel. So I started posting some Python videos, and those went really, really quickly in terms of number of views and likes and everything. So that was how I kind of moved more and more into first coding and then into the Python space. So it's not even that I'm some kind of Python guru or something, or that I know all the ins and outs of Python. That's not really how it started. It started with software design. I think for me, the design of the software, that's something that's really interesting to me. The principles, knowing the getting from let's say a problem description to something that makes sense in code. And I think that process for me, that's one of the most interesting things for me about coding. Not so much using a specific language or a specific framework. So when that happened, when I moved more and more towards Python, I still had the idea this is a technical channel, so I can do videos about Python or TypeScript or whatever. But then I quickly noticed that was actually not working, and I had to make a decision. Okay, I'm going for Python. And since then, it's been mostly a Python channel. But in the future, that's probably going to change a bit. I mean, I'm not stepping away from Python. I think Python is a great language. I like working with it a lot, so I will definitely keep posting stuff about Python. But in the future, I want to broaden the topics of the channel a bit. And I played around with that already a couple of weeks ago, if you've watched my video about Docker and deployment. And I think it would be nice if I dive a bit more into that area as well and talk about continuous integration, infrastructure as code. I'm going to do a really cool video about that in about a month or so. So there's some cool stuff that's coming up after the summer. Thanks so much, Kyung-soon. You're welcome. Glad to hear that you like the content. Okay, maybe I can start with a couple of questions from the chat as well. So John Doe writes, what age did you start coding? I think I started coding when I was 10 years old, 8 or 10 years old. I started writing code in BASIC, actually. I got my first computer was a Commodore 16, not even a 64, a 16. And I started building little games on the Commodore 16. But then after, I think, a year or two, I spilled a glass of milk over the computer, and then it was completely broken. And then I got a new computer, or not new, it was a second-hand one that had MS-DOS. So then I started playing around, well, first with more basic code, but then I quickly also moved to Pascal, and after that C++. And then during my studies, that was mostly Modula 2. I think that's actually been a Dutch programming language developed by a Dutch person. I'm not even entirely sure. Not Guido, but another Dutch person. It's kind of like Pascal. And then I moved on to Python, the really old Python 2. I did a lot of coding in Java, and then, well, it continued on. And in the last 10 years, I worked mostly in C++ and in TypeScript and JavaScript. Okay. So Alo writes, your production has improved so much over the years. Really proud. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it's something I tend to spend a lot of time on, like tweaking things all the time, like changing the lights, changing the microphones, changing the settings of the camera. There's so many things you can play around with. You just hope that it converges at some point, right? Okay, let's see. Adrian asks, any chance doing design in Rust? What do you think about that language? Yeah, it's something I'm quite interested in, actually. Well, as I said with the channel, I moved really towards doing mainly Python content, and I want to broaden the topics a bit. On the other hand, I think if I'm really going to focus on doing series of design principle videos in other languages, I'm not sure I should do it on this channel. I should maybe create a second channel and then do it for Rust, or perhaps do it for TypeScript or something like that. I have to think about what works best, because not everybody is going to be interested in that, and that's a kind of balance you have to find in the focus of the channel, basically. Let's see. How much weed do you smoke daily? You don't want to know. No, actually, I'm relatively drug-free. I did like to drink beers and wine and things like that for a while, but I completely stopped also drinking alcohol, I don't know, 5 years ago or something. Mainly because I still have young children, but they were really young 5 years ago, and they didn't sleep very well. And I noticed that as soon as I started drinking anything, I slept even worse. So I decided, okay, let's just stop that. Weed, I never really enjoyed that very much. So I tried it a few times, but I hope I don't get banned by YouTube now, by the way. So don't use weed. Okay. I'm going to go through a couple of other questions. Another question, your first videos were about JavaScript. Why did you switch to Python? Yeah, so that was kind of what happened randomly, but I also noticed that there's already many channels that are doing web development, and I thought it might be good to distinguish my channel a bit from those channels. Not that they're bad channels. I mean, there's really great web development channels out there, like Fireship and Jack Harrington and a couple of others that are really nice. But I thought it was actually nice for me also to focus on Python, because I was kind of familiar with the language, but I wouldn't in the beginning consider myself a complete Python expert. So it led to me also learning a lot about the details of how Python works and all the different things you can do with it. So I thought, when I create a channel like this, why not also create a interesting learning process for myself along with it? So I switched to Python, and I'm pretty happy with how that works. Ashwin asked, the lighting and production quality of your videos really great compared to the average coding videos on YouTube. What's your secret? I wouldn't call it the secret per se, but really the most important thing that I do, and this is also something that I learned from the startup world, is to iterate. Always iterate. And that has some consequences. One is that you force yourself to take really small steps. And every time you try to improve just a little bit. And that really helps, because it means that when you're doing things, in the beginning you don't worry too much about things having to be perfect. But as you do more and more and more, you just get a little bit better at it every time. You can really clearly see it in my videos, I think, because when you look at older videos, maybe more than a year ago or something, I look like some kind of green alien with bad lighting, and the space doesn't look so great. So, and then, I added some lights. I learned how to actually use a camera. I also invested some money in buying, good equipment and making sure that things work and that they're easy to set up. That's actually what I've I've been working a lot on in the last months in setting up this whole new studio environment and making sure that things are easy for me. I have the camera set up, I have the microphone set up, I can just switch on everything and then get started. And that also just really helps in terms of consistency, because then I won't forget switching on lights, or the camera or the microphone settings are not correct, or things like that. So that also allows me to iterate by standardizing things and by keeping as many things as possible the same, and also trying to remove myself from the equation, because I'm the human that's going to make all the errors. So the systems are going to help me avoid a lot of those things. So iteration, I think it's the most important thing. You don't have to, and for coding that's the same, right? You don't have to do everything perfectly at the start. You need to iterate. But in order to iterate, you need to understand, you need to focus on problems. And this is actually something that Ray Dalio also writes in his book, Principles. You need to be very adamant about noticing problems, so you need to be perceptive. And then you also need to not tolerate them and try to fix them. And that's when you iterate, and that's when you start this whole process. And every time adding like 1 or 2%, making things better really helps a lot and has actually quite incredible results over the long term. So, iteration. Pablo, thanks for everything. Your videos are amazing. Greetings from Argentina. Oh, thank you so much, Pablo. That's great. It's great that you like the videos. Let's see. There's a couple of other questions here as well. Maybe I should go to a couple of Python questions and drink something. So Mace asked the question, could you give more advice about when a functional programming approach might be preferable to an object-oriented approach? By default, I think in object-oriented programming terms, is it bad to mix paradigms within the same code base? Yeah, this is a really, really nice question. Python in that sense is an interesting language because that's both quite strong support for object-oriented and functional programming, which are really two completely different paradigms when you think about it. I did also a couple of videos talking about the difference between functional programming and object-oriented programming. Now, myself, I've had a long history with object-oriented programming languages like Java and C++. And I think what kind of happened is that the design patterns, when the design patterns book came out, I mean, that was really the era of object-oriented programming. Everybody was talking about Java, and that object-oriented programming was the next big thing, basically, that everybody was supposed to do. It also meant that the languages like Java were designed so that you could actually only do object-oriented programming. Like the Hello World version of a Java program is already a class with a static main method and so on. So I think what kind of happened is that in the industry, people got the idea like, okay, if you build serious, business applications, then it has to be object-oriented, which is, of course, completely ridiculous. There's no need for things to be object-oriented, or if it's not object-oriented, that it's bad code or something. Now, I find the more that I work with Python, both with classes, abstract-based classes, protocols, etc., but also really with the more functionally oriented tools coming from Partial, for example, or also just writing a function in Python, that in general functions lead to shorter code because you need less boilerplate. And the whole idea of inheritance, well, if you follow design principles or even the design patterns, then you're not going to have layers and layers of inheritance in there. The inheritance hierarchy is going to be relatively flat. You're mainly using inheritance to define the interfaces between the different parts of your program. And with functions, you can just as well use types for that, because that's what a type, in a sense, is as well. So in terms of when to use functional or when to use object-oriented, I tend to use more and more functional approaches. But there's a couple of things that I feel like classes are really, really good at. One is classes are great for representing structured data, especially if you're using something like a data class or Pydantic or attrs in Python. Those are really great tools to create structured sets of data. And that's harder with functions. I mean, functions are not there to structure data, right? But classes are really helpful. And of course, you can do that with tuples and dictionaries and lists as well. But I think that's what classes are particularly great for, creating those structured set of data and being able in your IDE to know what kind of things you can access in an object. So that's a great thing, and that's what I will in any case always use classes for, because that just makes a lot of sense, especially with tools like Pydantic that add things like validation if you want to read from a file. So that's pretty good. I feel in Python, if you have a class that's really data oriented, then I'm in general quite careful with adding a lot of behavior to it. I mean, some behavior is okay. You want to have an order class and you want to add a property that computes the total price of something, that's totally fine. But I tend to, if a method in class tends to get too long, I tend to split it out and turn it into a function, and then try to separate things a bit more by using a protocol class, for example, to add some abstraction. So another thing is that in Python, if you have a class that doesn't really represent data, but it's just like a bunch of methods, then often I find it's just as easy to just define a module in Python with functions, and then you don't need to create an instance of the object, and that to me that just simplifies the code a lot. So So for me, that's my approach. So generally, I at the moment I go more for functions than for classes with methods. But classes to me are really useful for representing data and adding a bit of behavior to it. So that's how I start. And then of course, when you refactor and you adapt your design, things might change. If you need to pass along, let's say, a group of methods to another function or another method, and you use a protocol or an abstract base class, well then having a class is also useful. So there's a couple of cases where classes are pretty useful. But about your second part, is it bad to mix paradigms? I don't think so. I think you should use the tools that are best for the job. I think the core thing that's important if you write code is that the code is easy to read and easy to understand by other developers or by yourself in a couple of months if you haven't taken a look at the code for a while. It's all about readability and about being able to change the code. Easy. And use the tools that you have for that, and focus on optimizing readability and the simplicity of the code, especially in terms of being able to change things, because things are always going to change. When you write code, probably half of it you're going to throw away in a couple of weeks, and you're going to replace it by something else. When you think about what you do when you write code, I mean, it doesn't happen so often that you just start with an empty file and you just start writing lines of code, right? Most of the time you're refactoring things, you're moving things around, you're changing things. So you need to make sure that process, you can do it as optimally as possible. And that means you need to let go of preconceptions like everything has to follow design patterns or everything has to be functional. No, it's not necessary. Just use what's easiest to understand and what's the most readable. Now, there are, of course, performance aspects you might need to take into account. That's another That's another area. But then again, yeah, should you use Python at all? Maybe move things to C++ or a language like Rust. Okay, Mike Britton asked, what are your thoughts about using more of Python's dunder methods beyond the basics of string and repr? Do they improve readability? Yeah, it depends. I mean, Python is a pretty special language in the sense that it allows a lot of customization. Python really allows you to change basically anything about how inheritance works or what a class actually is. And that's cool that this is possible, but it also means you have to be really careful. I think a lot of libraries are going a bit too far sometimes in terms of using what I call Python magic, you know, with decorators that magically add things to functions. And I have a tendency to just avoid all of those things and really focus on getting the basics right and keeping the basics really simple. The main reason for me is that I find that the IDE doesn't really support a lot of those things. For example, Pandas has a really nice feature where you can query a data frame using a string, and then you can refer in the string to variables in the context, which is nice, but the IDE doesn't understand that, and it then marks the variable as, hey, you're not using this variable, maybe you should replace it by an underscore. So there's those kind of things that start to go wrong when libraries rely too much on Python magic and overriding dunder methods to do things that are a bit different than what you would expect. And I think that's also an issue, that as soon as you start modifying the basic behavior of things, it's really easy to get confused as the user of the library, because you're not expecting that this is how the thing works, because that's not standard. So in general, I would be very careful with using dunder methods and keep things simple, actually. Okay, next question by Kisuke Urahara. Have you seen the new returns typing Python library that's still in beta? Yes, I have. I probably am going to do a video about it because I think it's interesting. Especially tools like the maybe type to do like optional chaining, which is currently not really possible in Python. There are a couple of other cool things you can do with it as well. So I definitely want to cover it on the channel at some point. Next question. Maybe I have a few more deployment or architecture question. Okay, Joel asks, I'll be interested to know what your Python production stack looks like. You've introduced many new and interesting libraries and extensions, such as Hypothesis, but I'm curious whether you actually use them in your production code. Yeah, the funny thing is that at my startup, I'm still running a startup as well next to the channel, which I'll talk about that in a minute. It's getting a bit crazy. I'm not really using Python at the moment because we moved to a completely TypeScript and Node.js focused stack. But where I'm really liking the use of Python at the moment is in all the backend stuff that I do for my ArjanCodes channel and my online course. So, for example, I've built a small backend service that generates invoices when somebody purchases a course from me and those kind of things. And I'm currently building it out to also add some Discord functionality. And there I really like using Python. I'm using all those libraries that I'm talking about, like data classes. And currently I'm actually implementing some tests using Hypothesis for that as well. So it's a nice little project. And what I'm also doing with that at the moment is, because that's little services running in the cloud, obviously, is that I'm currently looking at some infrastructure as code platforms to simplify the deployment. So yeah, that's it depends. I'm not using all the libraries. Sometimes I just look into something and then I do think it's cool, but I don't have a personal use for it at the moment. But I don't particularly see that as an issue either. I mean, for me, the channel is always focused on doing the things that are most helpful to you and not doing the things that are per se only helpful to me. So I don't mind talking about things that I don't immediately use. And maybe I come back to it after a while, and then I also start using it. Mike Britton, out of question, asks, what's the best way to implement your ideas within the context of a framework such as the Django REST framework? So how do you inject dependencies? Yeah, this is something that Robert Martin also mentions in his books, either in Clean Code or in Clean Architecture, that you have to watch out with frameworks. Because when you use them, you're marrying them. You're marrying a framework. For example, in my startup, when we're using TypeScript and we're using React, well, if you're using React, then that's basically going to be all over your code, and then you kind of have to follow the processes and the standards and the way of doing things in React. And this is the same for Django. And some frameworks are more specific and more close-minded, like Angular really defines things in detail on how you should do things with dependencies and controllers. And Django also has that for a big part. So that means that if you're using Django, then you should use the Django way of doing things, because otherwise you're just fighting against the stream, basically. And I haven't done that many things in Django specifically, so I can't give you an answer like, okay, this is how you do in dependency injection or something like that. But that's always something you have to be careful with when you select a platform. Like, does it actually gel with your philosophy and your own way of working? So let's see. We have lots more questions. Just going to delete this, otherwise I'm going to repeat questions, which is not a lot of fun. Maybe a few general questions again. A question by somebody whose name I can't pronounce, unfortunately. Arjan, do you hire? I've watched and worked through every one of your videos and would love to work for you and have you as my mentor. I am hiring actually at the moment, but not for a developer. I'm hiring for a marketing person to help me a bit with publishing the videos and posting on a social network and those kind of things, so that I can spend more time on developing the content. But if the channel keeps growing like it has been doing over the last year, then I think I am going to actually need to set up a development team to help me with preparing examples. It will also allow me to create more content, and maybe on different programming languages and different frameworks. Perhaps I might do a second channel at some point, focusing on a bit different area of software development. So I'm not hiring at the moment, but I think next year I will. Okay, let's see. A question from Man on the Dollar. Where is the letterboard now, and is it happy? I just want to know that it's happy. So I'm happy to tell you that the letterboard is very happy. It's still here, it's not gone. Actually, I have it right here. So say hi. Say hi to everybody. So no worries. I don't have plans for it to come back anytime soon. But if it's maybe I might be able to fit it into the background again at some point. What's your VS Code color theme and font? I think actually I'm using the default settings of VS Code. Actually, maybe we can also test this because I have a second scene here. So you should see my code editor now. So when I look at the settings, I think that's actually just, yeah, it's the dark plus default dark theme. And I don't think I installed any different font. What I do like to do sometimes is change the color of the header bar that you see here. You can actually change this in the settings in VS Code. It's pretty easy. Let me just see if I can find that here. Where is it? Settings. So I think if I go to the workspace settings, it should be in here. Yeah, this is what I do. So I customize the color of this top bar. And actually what I do is I do this per workspace, because then when I have my different projects, so I have a workspace for recording, I have a workspace for my work in progress repositories for the channel, I have a workspace for my startup company. And each of them, I just give it a different color. And that's actually really useful, because then I can immediately see, in what workspace am I at the moment. So this is actually how I change it. And then you can modify this, and then it's going to change. It's going to change the color. So that's really nice. Okay, I won't save this because that's a pretty ugly color. Let me go back to the main screen again. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, question from Muntian Jonat. Congrats, if you were to do it all over again, how would you do it? I don't know. That's a hard question to answer. I think the things that I did with the channel, it's really focusing. For me, the important thing from the start was focusing on trying to understand my audience and trying to understand what works with you, what kind of content you prefer, and I try to adapt to that. What I would have done differently, perhaps, is to be a bit more careful already at the start with sponsorships and things like that. You may have noticed I haven't done a lot of sponsorships in the last months. It's also not really been necessary, because my online course is actually going quite well. So I don't need to earn a lot of money by putting out advertisements or doing sponsored video content. So at the moment, my approach to that is to don't do sponsorships, but except if I think it's like it really matches well. I think if I were to do it all over again, I probably started doing that earlier and try to not rely on sponsorships as much. I think also sponsorships is not particularly something that you're interested in, except if it's like really on target and it's like really interesting. So I try to be extremely careful with sponsorships, and I'll continue to work in that way. Okay, question by K98 Killer. Do you prefer coffee, tea, or energy drinks? Coffee all the way for me. All kinds of different coffee. I'm a complete coffee junk. I try to reduce the amount of caffeine that I intake, so I normally don't drink caffeinated coffee in the afternoon, but there's good caffeine-free coffee as well, so I like to drink that as well, like what I have here right now. I might have to come back to that question later if I need more coffee. Okay. More questions. So let's see. Okay, William Dalton asks, do you have a recommended structure for code and tests in a Python project? Any thoughts on monorepo versus separate repositories? What's your take on package virtual environment manager such as Poetry, pipenv? Will you share advice on good ways to manage Python version upgrades and dependency changes in deployed server environments? Lots of different questions. About lots of different aspects of deployment. When I look at the project and I try to organize my code around it, I want to think carefully about, on the one hand, how I am going to deploy it and what are the things that I'm going to need, but also I think about how a development team is going to have access to all of that. So one thing that I noticed is that if you put things in too many different repositories, it becomes really hard to manage, especially if those repositories have lots of dependencies on each other. In that case, really defining clear packages that you publish is actually the way to go. Tools like Poetry, and in a sense also tools like Docker, of course, that also provide some level of isolation. I use them a lot. Poetry not that much at the moment, but Docker I definitely use a lot. And I really enjoy this having this level of separation and making sure that in all of your different environments that you're running, whether that's on your local machine or on a development server, on a staging server or on production, that you make those things as much the same as possible. Now, fortunately, cloud providers like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, etc., provide all kinds of ways for you to help with that standardization process. So you can define your environments or your environment variables in a place where it's safe. So don't put them directly in your repository. That's a bad idea. But you can define them in your cloud infrastructure without them being exposed. So those kinds of things are really useful. Another thing that I'm at the moment looking at is also more into how do you actually deploy, and there's of course some steps in that. If you use Google Cloud, you have like a command line interface, and then you can use that to deploy, let's say, a Docker image to cloud infrastructure. But what I'm looking at the moment is a tool called Pulumi. I don't know if you are aware of this, but this is actually really cool. This is a relatively new thing that's called infrastructure as code. I'm working, the reason I'm mentioning it now is that I'm working on a video about that. And that's actually really, really interesting. It basically allows you to define your cloud infrastructure. So which servers you need, what kind of other things you need, like databases or Kubernetes clusters or whatever, using the programming language that you like. So you can write that in Java, you can write it in Python, you can write it in JavaScript. So that's actually really cool, because then if your infrastructure definition is code, you can do like anything you want with it. You can load configuration using a Hydra package, or you could write business logic to determine whether or not you should create certain types of resources in the cloud, depending on settings and etc. And that also integrates with GitHub. So with the workflows in GitHub. So that's actually really nice. So I'm gravitating now towards using that more and more. Right, let's go back to a couple of questions from the chat anymore. Let's see. So Dexter Brain asked, do you have any course on Udemy? No, I don't. I use a hosting platform that's coupled to my website for hosting my courses, so I don't put it on Udemy. Pixel Therapy asks, I also want to know, what do you recommend for productive coding time? I'm not sure if you refer to tools or something like that, or more way of working. What I find really important is to make sure that I schedule for myself large blocks of time where I can actually focus and focus on development work, because otherwise it's just not possible. I notice for me to really get into it, I mean, I need like an hour or something to just be right into it. And then if I'm interrupted, I'm basically, I have to start over again. So having these large chunks of time available, I actually block them off in my agenda. So I know that, okay, then I'm going to work on that specific thing for a long time. And then that helps a lot. Another thing that I think is important is that you split up your tasks and not start working on a huge thing, but actually think about the steps that you need to take. I don't know if you've read the book called Getting Things Done. I forgot the name of the author, but there he also talks about when you think about the task that you need to do, that you need to make sure that you separate the doing of the task from the planning of the task. And so if you have a project, let's say you're building, I don't know, an API or something, and then you have lots of different tasks in that, of course. If you just have a huge task that says, okay, now I'm going to build this API, that doesn't work, because then you don't know where to start. So the important thing is to split it up and to also precisely define the first step that you need to take. And preferably you need to do it in such a way that the first step is something that you can do without you having to think too much about it. So that you did the thinking before, you did the thinking and the planning before, and then it's easier to get started. So that plus larger chunks of time, so try to avoid too many meetings or interruptions. I also do things like what other productivity gurus recommend, like Ali Abdaal, like checking your email or not every 5 minutes, and using supporting tools like note-taking apps and things like that to structure your thoughts and not forget about everything, to-do lists, etc. Okay, let's see. How do you make your coffee? Yes, well, I'm a bit scared to say that. I'm not like the person that makes like a cold brew and all the complicated things. I just use Nespresso, which, well, it's good enough for me. I don't need anything in particular, so that works fine. Can you do some Python UI stuff? Question by Alexis. Yes, I can. And actually, I've just last week recorded a new mini-series that's going to come out next week, where I'm going to show you how to build a dashboard UI with Dash and Plotly. So that's starting next week. It's actually a lot of fun to also work on UI stuff, so definitely coming. Ariel asks, what took you to do computer science as a profession? Did you have an alternative career? Well, the reason I studied computer science, that I started studying it, was when I was a kid, I really liked writing code and building like small little games on my little Commodore. And that kind of led me to, hey, I want to do this as a job because this is great. So I started studying computer science. But at the same time, I also had a big interest in music and playing guitar and keyboards, piano, everything. So that was always kind of in the background. So I did consider that as a kind of alternative for my career. I remember actually, when I was doing my PhD I did that in Switzerland, in Geneva, where I lived for 5 years. That's when I was, I think, 2 years in, I was starting to become really frustrated and was kind of fed up with the whole research thing that I was working on. So I actually applied to a job to do audio engineering, and they actually offered me a job, but then I kind of decided at the last minute, like, okay, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't do this, and I should probably still finish the PhD first. So I kind of stuck with it afterwards. And then I moved more into education and research, teaching programming, which I discovered I really liked doing, actually. It's one of the main reasons why I like working for this channel as well, is that it's basically me teaching coding, which is what I like to do, except instead of 100 students in my lecture room, I have, I don't know, 20, 30, 40,000 views on a video. So it's a bit different, but it's also really, really nice. Okay, let's see. Robert asked, are you planning to do some series video about microservice architecture? So yeah, as I said, I want to focus also a bit more on the whole architecture aspect of coding. So that means cloud infrastructure, architectural patterns. I also find them very interesting. I think I did a community post a couple of months back where I asked you, hey, what kind of topics would you be most interested in? And software architecture was one of the main things that came up. So I started doing that already with the Docker video, and I'm definitely going to continue also doing videos on that topic. Yeah. All right. Casey asks, how do people have green names? I think you get a green name if you are a member, actually. And let's see, other questions. Zachariah asked, Django or Node.js? I don't know. I have personally the most experience with Node.js. Works pretty well. I do think they're very different platforms, actually. I mean, Node.js is really like a complete infrastructuring with a packaging system, like in Node modules, etc. So I wouldn't directly compare it with Django. But yeah, that's like what I mentioned before, like the frameworks, you have to choose them carefully. Let's see. A few other questions here. Okay, Yoni asks, what are your tips for a take-home coding interview, specifically in Python and for the onboarding process? So take-home coding interview, I think you refer to that you have a job interview and then the interviewer asks you to do like a small project that you have to hand in. So any tips for that? I think it's important to really, carefully read what is expected, and then, if possible, do a little over-deliver. And focus on the details, and make sure that the details are right. We have at my startup company also a hiring process where we ask, if a developer joins, we ask them to do a small assignment also, mainly because we just want to see the kind of code that a person writes and how somebody handles a small project like that and what they deliver. And there's a lot of aspects to that, like are you delivering things on time? Did you test your code? Did you actually focus on making sure that it actually works well and that it works intuitively? So don't just focus on the question that or the small project that they ask you to work on. Try to think a little bit broader. For example, we have asked developers or candidates in the past to create a small website. It's very simple with a timer, and then you should have a button where you can set the timer and restart it, and a couple of things like that. And we noticed a huge variety in the quality of what people delivered. Most people were able to provide a website timer that worked. but the method of delivery was very different. We had candidates that just shared a Git repository, like, hey, here is the code, this is what I wrote. There were candidates that actually had the code, but also had launched a small server where everything was running. There were candidates that also focused on making sure that the user interface was intuitive, that it looked nice, and those details actually really matter. And if you do a project like that, it's not just about solving the coding problem. It's about the way you deliver it. And are you somebody that thinks about how to set things up and how things are supposed to work intuitively? And that's a really important aspect, because that if you are good at that part of the job, it means you will be able to work more independently in a company, and that's really valuable. Okay. Engineering question. Are you planning to do more test-driven development examples? Hopefully those that involve third-party libraries. Yes. I did spend some time on test-driven development, like red, green, refactor in the past video. I haven't spent a lot of time on that on the channel, to be honest. The reason is that I've decided to focus initially a bit more on the software architecture aspect. But of course, development processes are kind of part of that whole bigger, let's say, developing larger software at scale project. So it's certainly something that I'm going to cover again. I'm also quite interested in behavior-driven development, so it might be something that I want to cover too on the channel at some moment. Okay, next question. Let's see. Matteo asks, do you think a master's in computer science, or in my case informatics, is worth it in Belgium? Yeah, that's an important addition, of course, that it's in Belgium. No, just kidding. Actually, the universities in Belgium are pretty good. I think they're similar quality as the Dutch universities, which are, of course, awesome. Should you do a master? Yeah, that's like a hard question, because I mean, a couple of years ago, my answer would be a resounding yes, you should definitely do a master, because you're going to go even, in depth of computer science, and it's really valuable. But I must say, I've kind of changed my mind a bit on that. I think universities are in a really weird place, actually, at the moment. Well, especially for computer science. I mean, if you're studying like mathematics or physics or something, then you have such a body of classical work that doesn't really ever change. I mean, the basics of mathematics, that's been the same for centuries, right? So it also means that university educational programs don't really change all that often in mathematics. But the weird thing with computer science is that because it's such a new field, it's changing so quickly that I feel like for universities, it's impossible to keep up with all the change. And that makes sense, because universities are not in the thick of things. They're not working, they're not companies that are using the tools and that are getting the practical experience with it. So, and the teachers working at universities, they don't have that experience either, because they've done teaching for a very long time, or they're more interested in the theoretical parts. So it means that when you start doing a university education, that actually the things that you're going to learn, maybe in the first year, they're going to be kind of relevant to you, but the further you get, the more, let's say, harder it becomes to stay current. And that means you're going to learn a lot of things that are actually going to be pretty useless afterwards. And then on top of that, I think there are issues with how education is currently set up, in the sense that it's highly focused on assessment and grading, and that means that as a student you also tend to develop a mindset where you think that's the important thing, where of course the grade you get is completely irrelevant. It's about the things that you learn. And it's also from educational research, actually, that as soon as you grade somebody, they're not interested in learning anymore. They're just interested in the grade that they get. So I think the way that university education is set up at the moment is wrong, actually. I think it should really put the responsibility of learning back to the students, and they should form, universities should be a supporting institute for the student to have their optimal development, and that's not how it's set up. So in that sense, I think that doing a master could be interesting if you want to kind of get a deeper development of yourself for a certain topic in computer science. But it won't help you with preparing for the job market. I don't believe it will. I think there's many other things, other ways to do that that are going to be more efficient. So, I mean, there's lots of online programs nowadays that you can follow. It's my course, of course, also. But there's lots of those kind of teaching systems that are more, self-teaching systems that put you back in control, that focus on the practical aspects of what you actually need to know when you're going to work in a company. And I think that's way more valuable. So, yeah, so for a master, you have to think about whether that's something that's worth it for you. But it's no longer the case that you definitely need a master in order to become a software developer or something like that. Dor Feldman asked, tip for finding the first job after graduating computer science. Do you recommend boot camps, several months training courses? I think boot camps are really good if, let's say, you're not in computer science and you want to follow and you have a different background, you want to get into software development, and you need to efficiently learn a lot of things in a short period of time. I think that's where boot camps can be really helpful. If you've already studied computer science, I think you should actually just look for a job and treat that as your learning ground. And you're going to learn so many things there, you don't need a boot camp. Now, courses in general, I think, are useful. Also, after that, I wouldn't say boot camp of several months is maybe the way to go, but there's certainly it's good to always keep on learning the new things, like reading some of the software design books by Robert Martin is really a good way to kind of develop that mindset of focusing on writing better quality software. There's a lot of free content available, of course, like what I'm doing on YouTube, or there's many other YouTubers out there that produce interesting content. So I think the method of learning is not really that important. It's more your own mindset of always being open to learning and to continue to learn. Okay, let's see. More questions. How to become a pro in Python? It's a question by Gunjan Patil. Can you tell us the roadmap or resources to learn Python from beginners to advanced? I don't have like a fixed list of steps you should take if you have no Python experience at all. I think what I think many people focus on is the language, the syntax, like learning the syntax of Python. But actually, I think that's like the least interesting part of it. I think one of the most important things of being a computer scientist is not so much knowing how to code in Python or any other language. I think it's about developing your analytical skills and being able to frame a problem in a certain way, cut a problem up in little pieces, and being able to bring things back to the essence. And I think that's actually the important skill to learn if you want to be a great software developer. Because in the end, being able to analyze things and being able to structure things logically, this is the steps that you take before you even write a single line of code. And those things, the structuring, the analysis, are the key parts in what will become ultimately the code that you write. And then whether you write Python code with classes or functions, or you use Java, or you use C++ or whatever, it's not that important. I mean, the syntax is different, but once you know one or two of those languages, learning a third one or a fourth one or a fifth one, it's easy. That's not the challenging part. The challenging part is developing your analytical skills. And for that, it's really important to know about design principles and practice with design. And that's why I also created the course about that, because I think it's actually one of the most important things in software development to do really well, software design. All right. I see we have some spam. Oh my God. Okay. Can I do something about that? Yeah, I can probably do something about that. No. Okay. So, more questions. A question by the Paulcraft: how do you stay motivated to do YouTube and all the other stuff? Yeah, this is, well, on the one hand, it's actually really easy. I've discovered that the whole YouTube thing and all the processes around it are actually incredibly fun. I really like, I've always, as a technical person, I've always liked playing with electronics, and digital cameras nowadays can be quite complex. So it's pretty challenging to actually figure out how to use a digital camera properly. And then you have microphones and sound cards and all kinds of tools and things. So I really enjoy diving into that and trying to figure out what the best way is to do things. So it's just a lot of fun. So I really don't need to work at all to find motivation for that aspect. I do notice now that I have the company that I've been running for a couple of years now, and that of course takes up my time. I have my YouTube channel that's growing fast, which also takes up more of my time. So I've been working a lot in the evenings and the weekends to kind of being able to do all those things. And that's something I'm going to work on improving in next year. On the one hand, I'm going to delegate some tasks in my startup, because I want to gradually myself spend more time on the YouTube channel, because I think for me that's the way to go. So my plan is actually in the coming year to reduce my work in the startup, and hopefully within the year to be able to focus full time on doing the YouTube channel. And I'm actually really looking forward to that. So for me, all the motivation is intrinsic. What also motivates me a lot is when I see that the community is growing on Discord. The Discord channel is the Discord server is a lot of fun. If you haven't joined yet, discord.arjancodes.com, please join. It's totally free. It's really great, and I've met lots of new people because of the YouTube channel. I get to do really great collaborations with other companies sometimes. So for me, the motivation is that I'm really honored to be able to do this, and at the same time I'm learning so much. I think since I've started the YouTube channel, I've learned an incredible amount of things about programming and software design. And because of course every time you do a bit of research and then you discover some facet of design or any topic that you didn't consider before, or sometimes you post a critical comment on a video and then think, that's actually a good point, maybe I should rethink that and cover that in a video in the future. So I hope you don't see me as some kind of guru or something, because that's really not how I feel. I feel like I'm learning, and I'm trying to learn out in the open, and try to transform the things that I learn into videos that are hopefully helpful to you. Okay, question by Martin Paris. Toilet paper, over or under? Over, of course. I mean, under. Who does that? That's ridiculous. When you're in the toilet and you look, I'm going to explain exactly why you should do it like this. When and it won't be, it will be child friendly. When you're in the toilet, there's the toilet paper. Let's say it's on the left side. Normally, that's below your line of sight. At least I don't know of any toilet where you're sitting down, you have to reach upward to get the toilet paper. So if it's under, you don't see where you should reach for the paper. So it's like you're kind of moving like that, you know, it doesn't make any sense. It has to be over. Related to that, also fasten, then zip. Not zip, then fasten. Okay, Dave, are you Dutch, Danish, something else? I'm as Dutch as they come. I grew up in a small town in the province of Groningen in the Netherlands. They have some gas issues at the moment. You may have heard about that. But that's where I'm from. So my parents are both also 100% Dutch. Well, nobody is, I guess, 100% Dutch. It doesn't really mean anything. But I'm pretty Dutch. Grew up there, lived in the Netherlands all my life, except for a few years during my PhD. Well, it's a nice country. If you want to visit, I don't know, Amsterdam, or don't just visit Amsterdam, also visit some of the other places. There's really lovely towns to go. Another question by Dror Velman. Why do you use a Mac? This has actually very little to do with software development. I use a Mac because I've worked a lot with, as I said, I think in the beginning of the live stream, I've also was very interested in play music. So macOS has a couple of really useful tools for that, like Logic Pro or GarageBand. So for me, that was the reason I just picked a Mac, to buy a Mac to do music. And then when I started doing YouTube videos, well, I also used Final Cut Pro as my video editing program, which is also Mac only. So those things resulted in me being pretty deeply entrenched into the Apple ecosystem, which is why they do that, of course. But it works. It works, Apple. So that's why I'm on Mac. I also like that it's it's Unix based. So if you open a terminal, you can use Unix style commands, which I enjoy. But I mean, if you have a Windows machine, you have a Windows or WSL, which, well, you get basically the same thing. So, and then when you look at tools like VS Code or PyCharm, they're available for all the platforms. So I don't think there's any particular reason why I would need to stick with a Mac for software development. I think if I only did software development and I didn't have to worry about all the other tools that I'm using, well, I might probably still stay with Mac because I'm kind of used to it, but I would be perfectly happy with a Linux machine, actually, and just work with that. All right, maybe a few more questions from the chat. So Adam writes, any advice specific to getting hired in the Netherlands? Python seems to be a very specific niche here, and demand is towards C# and Java. Yeah, I'd say that, I mean, Python is really popular. I mean, it's like next to JavaScript, the most popular programming language in the world. But the main thing is that, I mean, Python is used a lot in areas like data science, for example. So a lot of people are, of course, looking for data scientists nowadays. So I think if you really want to work with Python, then I think that's a good area to start looking at data science, machine learning. I'm not sure there is advice specific to getting hired in the Netherlands. I mean, a lot of the countries in the EU, in particular, they have pretty similar kind of rules. So I don't think that's really a specific thing to getting hired in the Netherlands. It's not like we're asking you to, if you like Gouda cheese, otherwise get lost or something. Yeah, and of course, well, C#, Java, these are always going to be a big language that a lot of people that's going to be demand for. But in the area of machine learning, Python, business analytics, those things, Python is really good. All right, Nicola, and congrats for a nice milestone. Thank you, Nicolas. Yeah. The Wongant only. Hello, Arjan. Love your content. Would you consider making a how to deploy a Python series? I'd love to explain how to use Docker and Kubernetes. Yeah, so I did a video about Docker where I talked mainly about local development with Docker. I did set up the whole infrastructure for my startup a couple of years ago using Kubernetes. So I definitely want to cover that on the channel as well, because there's a couple of things that are good to know about Kubernetes when you're using that. All right, let's see. Are there other questions? Okay, so Cyan asks, hi Arjan, can you make a video about the cache, about caching? Yeah, I could certainly do that. At my startup, we're actually working currently with setting up cache on for certain things, so I can certainly do that. Yeah, I'll put that on the list. Will the live stream be available after it ends? Yes, it's public on YouTube, so you can watch this afterwards anytime you like. Let's see. Sati asks, is it okay to be completely lost for interviews with over 4 years of experience with data structure, etc.? It's like I'm studying the basics all over again just to be able to interview well. Yeah, that's... I mean... There's so many things to know and to keep in the back of your mind when you're applying to a software development job. It's just impossible to know everything. I think what led to the idea that you are supposed to know all those things in detail and come up with all kinds of algorithms on the fly is all these very hard Facebook or Google or FAANG company coding questions that everybody seems to focus on a lot. To be honest, I wouldn't worry too much about that. I don't think the most important aspect of being a software developer is to know all of those details. I think it's way more important that you show that if you're given an assignment that you can work with it and that you're able to deliver something. And that means that if you need to relearn things about some data structures, yeah, of course. I mean, if you haven't used, I don't know, a binary tree for a couple of years, or maybe you've never used actually a binary tree, how can we expect that you know this in detail and that you know all the algorithms to traverse trees and everything like that? So it's okay if you don't know everything. We have the internet and we have Stack Overflow, so we don't need to know everything. Christian, go on with your excellent work. Thank you, Christian. Will do. Of course, I will go on. Verax asks, do you consider starting streaming on Twitch? No. I'm going to stick with YouTube for the moment. Related question to that, by the way, is do you want me to do these live streams more often? I mean, I'm doing it now just for the 100K party and Q&A. But yeah, let me know. Just let me know in the chat if you want me to do this more often. I could certainly make this a recurring thing on the main channel if you'd like to. Okay. More questions. Do you think you'll be coding for the rest of your career? Why not? Or why? Why or not? I think I'll always be coding because I just like to do it. I don't care if it's for my career or not, or for just doing some fun little project. I just think it's cool. So yes, I think I will probably be coding the rest of my life, even when I'm retired, which will probably be still a long time. All right. How long does it take to shoot your videos? Question by man on the dollar. Well, shooting the videos is really fast. I can do, normally my videos have a couple of different segments, like a coding section and a talking head section, like the introductions and things like that. So shooting that is basically, I don't know, 1 or 2 hours of work. But that's actually not the main work of doing those videos, because when I look at the preparation time of the video, that's a lot more. You may not realize that, but there's actually a lot that goes into preparing and developing the examples. I think I spent about, I don't know, 2 to 3 days in total, full days on preparing each example. And that's not just me, because also when I prepare the example, I do a first version, and then it goes to the reviewers. I have a reviewer board. Those are just some members on my Discord server that have agreed to help me and give me some feedback. So kudos to them. By the way, they really help increase the quality of the code examples in the videos. So there's that round that goes to the reviewer. So we have discussion, and I'm going to modify the code accordingly. I think about creating the whole outline of the video, how I'm going through the different coding parts. So all of that takes me about 2 to 3 days per video, and the actual shooting is not a lot of work because it's all in the preparation. So, Frabat, welcome to the membership. Glad that you joined. Martin writes once a month. Sounds good. Yeah, that's something I was thinking about too, like doing a monthly live stream where I can answer any questions that you have. So I'm not going to promise anything right now, but I'm seriously considering doing that. As I think it's nice that we can chat in real life instead of me posting a video and then you commenting below, and then hopefully I see the comments. So this is a really nice interactive way to chat with you. Okay, Chris asked, hey Arjan, what do you think about most of the companies today ask in their requirements knowing DevOps concepts for backend engineer position like AWS, Kubernetes, etc. I don't have a clear view of exactly the things that companies are asking for. I think DevOps is an interesting area, and that it's particularly changing really fast. But there's also a lot of standardization that's happening. Like I remember a couple of years back, it was not at all obvious that you were supposed to use Kubernetes or something like that for your backend. I remember setting up the first version of our tool in our startup. We didn't use Kubernetes. We had set up like a virtual machine, and that's where you ran your code. And then, the whole cloud system that we have nowadays, it's only a couple of years old, basically. And before that, people were just doing random things. But Kubernetes is already a big step towards standardizing the way that you set up and manage your cloud infrastructure. and before that, Amazon, for example, they had their own thing. It wasn't as good as Kubernetes, so in the end, Kubernetes won the game, basically. So in a sense, Google won because they were the ones that created it. But it also means that if you look, I'm actually very interested in what's going to happen with DevOps in the coming years, because we see that there is a series of steps that are being taken to really standardize and simplify things. Like Kubernetes itself is already a huge simplification over being over having to manage and monitor a complex cloud setup. It's already a lot simpler. But then you see next things such as the Lambda functions in AWS or Google Cloud Functions or Cloud Run. Those kind of things that really simplify things even more. You don't even need to worry about infrastructure anymore. You just push some code to the cloud, and then you get a URL back, and then when you go to that URL, the code is run, and that's all that you need. And then in the backend, it scales up automatically. So I think a bigger and bigger part of the job of DevOps is going to be to navigate all of those different tools and come up with the simplest way of doing things. And I've really moved myself away even from using Kubernetes directly, because often I find that a simple cloud function or Lambda function in AWS that does the job just fine for a lot of things. So you don't need complicated things anymore. All right, Bart. Hey, Bart. I think it will be interesting to hear about performance aspects in future video. Runtime, memory, especially with an eye on scalability, best practices, analysis, profiling. Yeah, performance is definitely interesting. I think I got away with not talking about performance by simply saying every time, yeah, well, if you want performance, don't use Python. But what I might like to do is cover at some point integrating Python with like a lower level C library or something. Senex asks, are you DevOps on your job or pure developer? I'm actually both. Well, at the moment at my startup, I'm doing less and less development. We have a full-time developer that's now starting to take over more of the work that I did. So in the beginning, I set up the whole system from scratch, basically wrote all the code, set up the whole cloud infrastructure, everything and all the integrations. But when we hired the developer started doing mostly the coding part while I took care of the infrastructure. And now he's actually also taking over more the infrastructure itself. So I've done both for quite a few years, but I'm slowly stepping away from the doing those details at the moment. As a Python guy, am I a Python guy? I guess I'm a Python guy nowadays. Have you thought about Cython? Yes, I have. I have not looked into it in detail, but that's certainly also an interesting topic to cover on the channel at some point. Let's see. Yeah, I also see some questions about Golang. I did look a bit into Go. I have not had a lot of experience with it, to be honest. But yeah, there's so many new languages that I'd like to dive into more detail. It's maybe a question for you. What do you think I should do? Should I post videos sometimes about other programming languages? Are you interested in that? Should I stick with Python? And I don't know. And what programming language do you want me to focus on then? Let me know. Top Notch Tech asks, what's your thoughts on AI programming tools like GitHub Copilot? Will they one day replace us developers? Yeah, I did the video about GitHub Copilot a while ago, and I've also worked quite a bit with Tab9, which is also a tool for auto-completion. I find sometimes it's actually quite useful. And when I use GitHub Copilot actually from time to time, but what I mainly notice what I'm using it for is that it's just going to fill in some of the standard things for me. Like if I create a new Python example, for example, and I start with an empty file, and I write dev main, then GitHub Copilot already fills in the empty main method and the if dunder name equals main, etc., etc. So that just makes it easier. I don't really use it a lot to complete algorithms for me, but I do think as a kind of glorified autocomplete tool, it's pretty nice actually, and it works pretty well. So yeah, I'm very interested in seeing where it's going. I'm definitely going to keep using it. Because I think it's a part of my responsibility as a YouTuber to be aware of these tools and to see where they're taking things. Okay. Rust could definitely do that. JavaScript would be great. Scala, Elixir, C++, yes, so that's basically everything. No, stick with Python, Chris. Yeah, I know. That's what I'm dealing with. I think that's also an issue with that there's so many languages coming out. Like now we have a new a follow-up of the C language that Google is developing, Carbon. It sounds interesting, but I don't know. Should I do a bunch of videos about it? I'm not sure. Perhaps we should wait a bit and see how it pans out. But in the end, I think for me that's the important thing, is the way that I see the channel, is that it's not in particular about Python. I don't see my channel as a purely Python channel. I see it as a channel to help software developers. I do it most of the things in Python because, well, it's consistent. But lots of the things that I talk about you can apply in any language, like the Docker stuff, or when I talk about design patterns or design principles. Yeah, you have that in every language. So that's kind of how I view it. I see that I'm actually repeating what Evan is saying as well in the chat. Yeah, so that's basically it. COBOL. You want me to do COBOL videos? Really? I'll think about it. I remember actually when I was studying, this was in the 90s. There was, the Millennium problem where people were afraid that the world was going to end. And actually there was a program that you could enroll into as a student, and I didn't do it at the time, but I know some of my the students from my class were doing that you could basically stop studying for like half a year or a year, and then you would spend 1 year of your life delving into old COBOL code and other code that wasn't compatible with the year 2000. And I think some of those students actually made quite a bit of money doing that. So, just had to remember that. All right, I'm going to close off for today. I really enjoyed chatting with you. Do let me know also in the comments if you have any questions for for a future live stream. I think I'm going to do this again. It's a lot of fun. So thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a great weekend, and looking forward to chatting with you again, either in Discord or in the YouTube comment section. So thanks so much. Thanks for watching. Take care and see you soon.